Richard Fallon.
It's me. Hello, everybody. It's an honour to be invited to such a beautiful country and lovely place. I'd just like to say thank you to you all for learning to speak English. Cesar said earlier that he'd be 30% more intelligent if he could speak in Portuguese. I will be 100% less useful if I speak in any other language. So I'm very impressed with you all. Anyway, I'm going to speak about Kaizen. Before I do that, I'd like to make a bold statement that I don't want to stand here, I've flown over from England, I don't want to stand there for half an hour and talk to you about something and you all go home and do nothing. So my aim is for at least one of you, ideally more, will go back, go to work and find ways of being able to introduce improvements into your working life. So hold on to that thought. This was originally going to be a question about learning more about the audience, but quite a number of people have asked a few questions already. I'm interested though, because we talk a lot about change. Who here is trying to change their own company? Good. Oh, good, good, excellent. This is hopefully reasonably relevant in some way. So Kaizen. Before we get going, I'm not going to talk, this presentation is not really what you can download from the internet, like all the presentations today actually. This is not something you can Google. This is just going to be a collection of stories, of things that have happened during my career. They're all true. How I choose to interpret those and decide whether they were useful or not, maybe you might disagree on those interpretations, but they are all true stories. I hope you enjoy them as much as my daughter used to enjoy me reading her stories. So, in the beginning, I've been to university, I've learned about computers. I've gone back to university, I've done a master's in computing. I'm now ready for somebody to start paying me some money to be a computer programmer. For some context, Google is not yet a verb. It's not far off, it exists, but people do not use that term. Extreme Programming book had just been released and I was completely unaware of it, and so was everybody else who I worked with at the time. And this is a story about a filing cabinet. So, I got my job, I was over the moon. My very first week, I went to see the architect and he told me, go over to that filing cabinet and take out the design diagrams and study them. So, I go over to the design cabinet. And the filing cabinet, I pull out the documents, quite a weighty tome. I sit and I spend the first week reading all the documents and understanding lots of things that didn't really make too much sense to me, but I spent the first week. Second week, I was given my first assignment. Very exciting. It was a plugin for Lotus Notes written in C++. I'd never written a language, I'd never written C++, and I didn't know what Lotus Notes was, but I was still very excited. And then I started work, and a very strange thing happened. I started looking at the code, and the code was different. It didn't match what the design said. I thought this was strange. I thought, should I change the code so it makes the design correct? Or should I just ignore the design? I wasn't sure, so I went back to the architect. And I told him, I said, the designs don't match the code. He said, oh, don't worry about that. We haven't updated them. Just the code is the truth. Follow the code. Great. So, and I did, and I carried on. But interestingly, we were recruiting quite heavily at the time. I saw new people arrive after me, and they were all given the same marching orders to the filing cabinet, and they all read the design documents. This is my first week, followed by my first few months in IT, my very first lesson in waste. So anyway, Kaizen. Comes from lean ways of working. Okay, so you could download that from the internet. My first introduction to certainly some of the ideas that came from lean ways of working came at the same company. And this was the beginning of a complete change in everything that happened to me from there on in. So Google still isn't a verb, but now it's a lot closer. I'm still at the same company, but somebody else has joined the company. He was a doctor. I'm not sure what he was a doctor of, but he was a doctor of something, and he'd read the book. He'd read Kent Beck's book on Extreme Programming Explained. And one day, we all came into work. It was about 1999, 2000, and there was a chapter had been printed off on everybody's desks in the development team. And I took this chapter, I had no idea what it was, and I read it on the bus on the way home. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. Everything made sense about breaking the units of work down into something deliverable. If it was bigger than 2 weeks, you probably didn't understand what it was. We were working in a high-paced environment. It was around about the dotcom boom. We had much more work than anyone knew what to do. Everyone on the team knew we couldn't do what we were being asked to do, but we still came into work and still did as much as we could anyway. And this book seemed to make sense of things. And I was hooked. And actually, as it turned out, everyone in the company seemed to get it. And almost overnight, the company transformed from, I don't even know what process we were doing before, but we became extreme programmers. We took all the requirements, we put them onto story cards. We had a board on the wall with story cards. The project manager changed from what she was doing. She monitored how many cards a week were being delivered. We worked in pairs. We did test-driven development. We followed lots of rules. And development, I assume, picked up. I don't think we really knew how much we were doing before. But certainly the mood and the sort of atmosphere within the company picked up massively. And I think a really key thing, thinking about what was important at the time, we talk about feedback, being able to get feedback at different points. And extreme programming, whether you're familiar with it or not, one of the things is people work in pairs, which is a strange concept. Maybe it takes twice as long, and still people will use that argument, and it's still difficult to argue. However, there's a couple of things to it. The developers are getting instantaneous feedback on their decisions. One person wants to do something, the next person will say, is that really how we're going to do this? Or can I try? Did you think of this? Did you know that that function already exists? Everything's delivered in short iterations, 1 or 2 weeks. And the amount of information you can get back in 2 weeks, how much were you going to do against how much you were meant to do? How many stories of a certain size? How many defects? Test-driven development, giving you feedback on the quality of the work that you're actually doing. Nothing gets delivered over to test until you've passed the initial development tests. We did estimating. We tried all sorts of different things. We did small, medium, large t-shirt sizes. We did ideal days and I don't know if anyone's been involved with this, but the concept of ideal days was a difficult one to swallow, that 3 ideal days did not equal 3 days, was not one that the business could really stomach. We did retrospectives every 2 weeks, and we got information back from certainly the development team, maybe not the whole business at the time, if I'm honest. A key thing was allowing the capture of how many cards were delivered in a week or 2 weeks allowed us to predict some kind of idea of what was going to be happening next. We looked at velocity. Is it Kaizen? Not really. We changed the process from, I don't know what it was, to something else. We made some changes, but we were making improvements. Were they continuous? I'm not sure. I think it was a change for good. It felt like a change for good at the time. A question I like to ask when I think of continuous improvement is, are we better today than we were yesterday? And I should have said at the beginning, really. So I'm now a co-owner of a company, of a development company. So it's really important to me that we are improving all the time. And it's important for all our people. if they don't feel like they're improving, they'll go and get a job somewhere else. So we constantly have to ask this question. And that's my interpretation of what Kaizen is. But what does better mean? What is it we want to be better at? Do we want to be faster? Do we want to be more efficient? Do we want to have higher quality? All of those things. And how do you know? Obviously, you need metrics and you need feedback. And depending upon the problem that you're trying to solve, the metrics for that might be quite difficult. So, I've worked at this place for a few years. I feel like I'm an Agile expert. Nobody else really seems to know much about it at the time. I was eulogizing to my friends in the pub about how we were going to change the world. And I actually started a company with some people 20 years ago. That is a different story. That is a story of waste. But we were bought out by another organization. And I went to work for that company. And I resigned after about 3 months. It was awful. It was anarchy. The salesman came in with new requirements every week. What the development team were working on was changed every week. Almost nothing ever got delivered. And I resigned. It was so bad I didn't think we could do anything about it. And in my kind of exit interview, I was asked what the problems were, and I told them, and they said, well, what could you do? And I basically relayed Kent Beck's book again. I said, well, we could do some extreme programming, but I never used those words. I just said we could introduce some story cards, and we could have it on the wall, and we could have weekly sprints. And they actually, there and then said, well, you can be in charge then. And I was made in charge of a number of teams, about 30 people, and I was head of application development for a small public company. And the key thing about this story is that the business absolutely loved it. The different people around the organization who would come and say, if this is how life is going to be from now on, then let's have more of it. That was salesmen, that was marketing people. So the point that's really interesting to me as I look at this presentation and think what was important to me is I can see that this works. I can see that software development is very difficult. And if you make it easy for yourself by making it easier to a shorter timescale to deliver something a little bit more often and early and smaller, it makes the problem a little bit easier to do. And I spent the next few years working in small companies, turning them around, basically giving them what Kent Beck had written, and I was taking all the credit for it. And after a while, I thought, I need to go to a big company. I need to try something and see how the big boys do it, the big boys and girls. So how does a big organization with a big budget and huge customers and a 3-year timeline, how do they do this? So I joined a big consultancy. I wanted to find out how they would work. How on earth anyone with a team of 200 and 3 years to do that work could possibly ever deliver anything. And really, in my mind, I wanted to change them. I wanted to take the glory and make them agile. I should say, Google's definitely a verb by now. It's about 2008. So I got there. Well, that's me helping someone out of a hole, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't get support from anyone, really. I could find people dotted around the organization. They wanted to be agile. They'd heard of it. Some people liked to work in pairs, but nobody would support an overall change. Everyone had, well, no one that I had access to. So everyone that I could access was effectively middle management, and they didn't want to change. They had a job. They did that. They followed a certain process, and it worked for them. They weren't getting fired. So there was nothing I could do. And then I was given a gift. I joined quite a large account. There was hundreds of people, mostly developers and testers. And we were working for a large area of government. And the government, this particular area, had adopted Scrum. And they brought in some Scrum consultants to help them change, and that was a huge job. But they insisted that their suppliers adopt Scrum. And all of a sudden, I'm now working on an account that somebody says, oh, well, what do we do? What's Scrum? How do we do it? And they all of a sudden started, as big organizations do, started trotting out leaflets and brochures about how they were agile by default and other phrases that spring to mind. But they were dragged into agile ways of working. And the result was really very interesting. So across this account, where really we delivered, we were doing okay, but then people started to kind of come out the woodwork with, oh, maybe we could do this, or maybe we could try like this. And over time, the whole account had increased the number of agile teams. I think over a period of years, every project on that account was run in an agile way. And it wasn't just, oh, we follow Scrum. It led to still one of the best run projects I've ever been involved with. So as I said, people came forward of, oh, I'd like to do Kanban. And we introduced Kanban. We had information radiators. We worked in a distributed delivery environment. Our customer didn't work at our office ever. We had a Kanban board on their site. This is for a particular project within the account. We introduced pair programming, which still was never accepted. But we enforced it. We said it's agile, and people kind of agreed to it through gritted teeth. We had self-organizing teams. The development teams had picked up so much pace that we were now delivering to the test team, but they didn't know what to do. They were suddenly getting loads of work. So now the developers would start working with the testers. Developers would start writing test scripts at the beginning. The test team were involved at the beginning. When we started designing the work, testers were involved from day one. That was really interesting. That meant that as soon as development started, testers were writing test scripts. When the code was completed, it was handed over to the test team. The test team knew what it was. In a lot of cases, they ran some automated tests and it just worked. And the developers were using test-driven development. And why did we get to this stage? It came through from continuous improvement. Lots of people coming forward with ideas. We took over a project that was failing. It was massively behind. We changed everything about it. We even changed the contract with the customer. We actually delivered against story points, not against a build us one of these. We were contracted to do 270 story points in 6 months or something like that. So the whole thing changed. I was looking through, as I was preparing this, I found a document that I'd written to the senior management, kind of above the project, above the account, to try and explain. I wanted the rest of the company to understand what was happening on this account. We kind of operated in our own closed environment, and the rest of the company didn't see it so much. And I think there's a few things really that are particularly interesting. It's important to note that despite the fact that the project is now ahead of schedule, the project continues to apply the continuous improvement pattern. You don't improve, it's not a reaction to adverse conditions, it's a principle to be applied every day. And that for me, I felt like the words were really quite powerful. And actually to see that was written 5 years ago, I was quite pleased with myself, so I've stuck it up on here. The result of this project overall, we delivered more stories, we improved all the time, we met the contract that we were the 270 story points, and it was perceived as failure. So, the product owner that we've been working with, turns out was asking us to do things, and somebody somewhere higher up the organisation in government didn't like the thing that they'd got, and they didn't want it. What's the lesson from this? I'm not really sure. We worked really closely with the product owner. We had daily triages. We had the information radiator. She knew exactly what she was getting, but her boss didn't know exactly what she was getting. Should we have done more? Should we have presented more to the business? Possibly. I think a key lesson, a really important thing to take away from that, is not to throw things away when you know you're making improvements. We could see that we were delivering more. We were capturing the metrics. We had all the tools to see. We could see the development team was enjoying themselves more. The testers were saying, I've never really worked like this before. I've never had help from the development team. Everyone was happy. You could feel it. So we didn't throw it away. And in fact, we took a lot of the people who contributed to a lot of the good ideas on that project, and we formed a new company called Naimuri. So it's quite interesting actually now, because here I am at a lean conference, and it's very difficult to name a business. You either make it completely abstract that it means nothing, or you try and come up with a name. And Naimuri, we hope, in Japanese, Nai is no, Miori is overburden. So we think it's no overburden. I've never tested this out, but that's what our interpretation of this is. And the idea is, behind Naimuri, is we can do the things the way that we want to do them. And we can actually choose customers that at least have an idea of, or work in a way that we think want to work with us. So one of our greatest customers, that I won't name, came forward and said, I know roughly that we want to get to here. We want to narrow the gap between technology and their customer, but we have no idea how to do it. And that's brilliant. When people come with a very clear view of, I want you to build us one of these, that's usually the start of disaster. And anyway, so I'm talking about continuous improvement, and all along the way we've done Agile, things are getting better, we've implemented some change, we've told someone what to do, we've said you're going to be working in self-organizing teams, we instruct people to sit in pairs. It's brilliant, everyone's getting better, and I think that was the height of it. And it was only recently, I came into our office the other day, and basically I'm seeing people improving on their own. And it's really quite a powerful thing that we have a small internal team. They were working on some research. The research has proved to be quite popular. It's actually a launch day today back in England. It possibly might scale to 300,000 customers a year. And these guys are very junior. They're interns. They've got 1 or 2 years experience on the whole. They were kind of our bench. They were really just there to have something to do whilst they were waiting to come and work on other projects. And it's really taken off. And as it's taken off, the focus has gone back to them to say, actually guys, is this going to scale okay? Is this going to be secure? And a huge amount of pressure. We didn't tell them to work in pairs. We didn't tell them what to do. I came in one day, they've redesigned the Kanban board. They've been to see other projects around the company to see how it works. They've looked at definitions of done on the board to see what works for them. And they're making changes without us telling them how to make changes or telling them what to do. And for me now, that is everyone in the company feeling as though they can make some changes. Now the next slide in some ways can be, I still find it a little bit shocking. So this is a normal Kanban board. They changed this. It looks quite normal. I actually don't understand how it works, and really, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. They have different colors for different items, so whether it's in test, whether it's in analysis. I couldn't explain to you how this board works, but I have seen the team get together and they have decided they know the problems that they're having. We record how many stories get done. They've made some changes. We can see an improvement. I think the board could be simpler, but it's not for me to tell them. Let them agree how things are going to work. But what's even stranger, a subset of that team has its own Kanban board, which is different to the other one. Now, it is related to infrastructure, but they've all been involved in contributing to how to make their lives better. So Kaizen. This makes me think, well, what's enabled this? How does this happen? Yes, you need effort. You need to think about the things you want to improve. You need to spend some time to coordinate people, to get people on board, to rally the troops, to convince the management, whatever that takes, but it definitely requires effort. Now, I've stopped short in most of these of giving you anything too specific, but certainly in our world, in software development, you need a process. And I'm not sure that Kanban is really a process, but all of our projects are run with a Kanban board. It provides you visualization. It gives you a focus on delivering the most important thing. And after that, it's up to every team to decide how to do that themselves. And I think having Kanban there allows it to be open-ended. Some people might be a bit uncomfortable about everyone doing things slightly differently. Maybe you need to learn how different projects work. I'm still 50-50 myself on some of that, but it allows and it encourages people to make improvements. I think people feel as though they have a voice. That makes a difference. And in fact, so culture. I don't know how many presentations today have touched on the word culture. Culture is key. And if you think of the stories that have happened to me, where I've tried the same thing, I've tried to introduce Agile, and where I've had support from the top, it's worked, and it's worked with massive, massive success. And when I've tried to make changes where there is no support, it hasn't worked at all. And that really needs to come from everyone. A great example is DevOps, is maybe your technical lead or the architect supports the change in the delivery team, the development team. You produce more stuff. You might even get it tested quicker. And when you throw it over to the operations team, they're not ready. Unless you've got support across the organization from end to end, you cannot make those changes. What's also important, as I said, is everyone has a voice. Many people's opinions are better than one, yes. At Naimuri, we're a completely flat structure, so everyone is badged IT consultants. They do different roles, yes, they have different roles. People recognize that there's people with more experience, but everyone has a voice. I think a really good example is our technical strategy. So a technical strategy might be a 3-month piece of work to write a 20-page document that very few people ever read, and that's probably out of date the day that it's written. What we have is a set of communities based on areas that are of interest to us, things like data storage, programming languages, techniques, and we assign someone as a community owner. We build up a community of expertise, and the only rule that we give to the company is you can't bring in a programming language or a new technique without first running it by the community and getting sign-off from them. And that means that our company and the people are deciding what they do and are controlling it for themselves. Small steps. I think small steps are good. If you're looking to make change and you're struggling, you're not getting the backing, small steps are good. Even as today's gone along, I'm thinking, are small steps really required? So we have a customer, we work with the UK Home Office, and typically they do things in very large cycles. They take 3 years, spend 1 year talking about it, probably the last 6 months trying to deliver something. They've got a new branch, and they specialize in making it real. And they don't do anything if it takes more than 12 weeks. It's a fantastically interesting area to be. So why am I talking about this now? I think it's because actually they were radical. They completely changed. Overnight they said, we're going to do things in 12 weeks. And everything from there has followed on. And it's proved to be very successful. What you do need is good people. This is from our summer party. Good people and problem solvers. And I think in this industry attracts them. You need to keep people engaged. If they just clock in at 9 and clock out at 5, nobody really cares whether the process works or not. But you want people to be trying to improve their lives, the delivery of the work that they're doing. And on that, slightly off topic, but focusing on recruitment, bringing in the right people. The more you put into anything, the more you get out. So we have our own Kanban board and our own continuous improvement for recruitment as well. But I cannot stress enough how important that is. We have a good test, which is, are the people that we're recruiting better than the people we had 5 years ago? So we're always making the company better with each new hire. Feedback, yes, we've talked about that. Regular retrospectives, a 2-week project retrospective. At Naimuri, we also have non-project retrospectives. Some of them are driven by the company. Some of the topics are set by the company, but it can be whatever the guys want to talk about, and they get together and look at what they want to try and improve. A good example of that was how to write blogs, which was actually one of the reasons why we got invited here today. But they look at trying to improve themselves. And what else? So it doesn't have to be quite so clear-cut. We have something, I don't particularly like it myself, it affects me more than most. It's a way of monitoring the effectiveness of meetings. So at every meeting, we have a little box, and everyone has a red or a green token. And people are, on the way out, get to put in a red or a green token. Green means that meeting was useful and it was of interest to me. Red means, I really wish you hadn't invited me to that. And as I coordinate probably more meetings than some of the others, it affects me more than others. But if you think about this, and this was thought up by, maybe got it from somewhere else on the internet, but someone else introduced that into the company. It works really well. It really makes you think about what you're doing when you're setting up a meeting, who to invite, how to run it. And what does all this mean? Somebody once said to me a few years ago, I think this really 20 years ago, when a company wanted to change, like pre the dotcom boom, when a company wanted to change, they'd say, I want to sell more units. I want to be better than company B. I want to be bigger than company B. And they'd go through a change process. And they would get to where they wanted to be. They'd sell more units than company B. But now change happens all the time. People need to be able to make changes just to keep up. The pace of change is incredible. Moore's law in different forms still applies. And nobody understands, nobody can understand what a doubling in capacity next year actually means. If you go back a few years and see, again, I'm going off topic now, but if you go back a few years and say what was going to happen about electric cars, probably not many people would have given you much credit. In 5 years' time, we could have sold all the diesel and petrol cars. Nobody really understands the pace, and your company needs to be able to make changes. But you need to know that they're changed for good. That's my last slide. And a little thing, just to say if you have any questions or anything, just to contact me there. That's it. Thank you.